Hi, I'm Brandon Grant, Marketing Director here at QuoteWerks. Today we're going to walk through the integration setup between QuoteWerks and Sage 50 US Edition. The integration between QuoteWerks and Sage 50 currently supports Sage 50 Premium, Complete, and Quantum editions. Please see the QuoteWerks website for specifics on the integration. In order to set up this integration, you will need to be logged into QuoteWerks and Sage 50 as an admin user or someone with master rights, and you will also need to have both programs running. Okay, let's get started. So to begin the setup, in QuoteWerks, click on Tools, Options, and then the Accounting tab. There's a couple different settings we need to adjust here before we move on. You'll see there's an Estimates, Invoices, Sales Orders Integration section. This is where you want to set your accounting integration. So in this example, for Sage 50, we want to set it to Peachtree, which is Sage 50's previous name. If you want to use Sage 50 for your purchase order integration as well, you'll need to change the purchase order integration to Peachtree as well. If you're not going to be using the purchase order integration, you can leave it as none, or if you're using another system, you can set from the available options here. Once you apply those settings, you'll see there's a link type section, and it should be set to the interactive or API selection. There's also an option for export and import. That integration does not contain the amount of features that the Sage 50 to QuoteWerks integration currently has, so we want to make sure we select the interactive link, and when you're ready, click on the Setup Link button. This will open up the Sage 50 interactive link setup window. You'll see we have the General tab where we'll start. This is where you're going to specify your company file and the company ID. Mine is going to be using the demo file that comes with Sage 50, so just make sure you have your company file selected. The next tab is the Transaction tab, and we're just going to go right down the list here of these various tabs. First, you'll select your transaction type. This is the type of document that you want exported from QuoteWerks into Sage 50. Right now I have mine set to invoice, but if I wanted it to export over to Sage 50 as a sales order instead, I could select sales order. I'm going to go ahead and switch it back to invoice because that's the option I want. For the date of transaction, you'll have two options. It can be the date that the document was exported out of QuoteWerks and imported into Sage 50, or you can use the original document date on the QuoteWerks document. It's up to you which one you'd like to use. For most users, they typically choose the date exported though, because that is when it's actually put and entered into Sage 50. Now we have a couple options here if items do exist. So if an item does exist in your Sage 50 price file, you have an option of updating the price in the price file or not updating it. In our example, we're going to go ahead and choose to update the price. And then your customers. If your customers already exist in Sage 50 when you're exporting a document over, you have the option of updating it with any of the information that might be new, perhaps their address changed or there's a new contact, or you can choose to leave everything the same. For our example, we're going to go ahead and have it update that as well. For invoices and sales orders, we want to set an accounts receivable count. So you'll click on the drop down here and you'll see a list of accounts that are available. You just need to select the one that is correct for your company. Again, we'll go ahead and just go with this option here. The next section is where you can define how you want to handle purchase orders. You can see with your purchase order integration, you can select QuickBooks or Peachtree or ConnectWise or Autotask. For most of you, you're probably going to have Peachtree or Sage 50 selected as your purchase order integration. You can then ask or set up when you want the purchase order created. So this will actually create the purchase order automatically for you. You have three options here where you can have it never create it, so that it'll be more of a manual process where you'll need to go into Peachtree and create it. Always, so every time a document's created in Sage 50, QuoteWerks will always create the PO for you. Or you can be prompted. That's probably the option you want to select. That way you have the choice whether or not you want to create the PO at that particular time, or you can cancel out and have it created at a different time. From here, you want to make sure you set your accounts payable. It's going to be a required selection here, so make sure you click on your drop down and select the option. I only have the one, so we'll have that selected. And then the ship to information, you can choose whether it's going to be left empty or same as the order shipped to. Typically, it'll be the same as the ship to. And then very important, After the document has been exported from QuoteWerks, you can update the document status in QuoteWerks to any of the options that you've set up in QuoteWerks. In our example, we have it set to exported. This makes it really easy to filter out any documents that have already been exported over to Sage 50, so we know not to export them a second time. Okay, so let's move on to the Mappings tab. So the Mappings tab is going to be one of the most important tabs in this integration. We're going to start with our Items tab first. This is how we map how the item is going to be sent over to Sage 50. So for example, when the QuoteWerks is sending it over to Sage 50, the way we identify if the item already exists is by the manufacturer part number in QuoteWerks. If you want to change this, if you have very specific part numbers that you've set up, you can select from like the vendor part number or any of the custom fields. For most of you, however, the manufacturer part number is a unique identifier in QuoteWerks, so that's the field you're most likely going to want to use. You do have the option to change it though if you need to. So when an item is sent over to Sage 50 from QuoteWerks, it will check to see if that part number already exists, and if it doesn't, then the item will then be created for you in Sage 50. The discount item, charge item, and shipping items allow you to choose how these item types are going to be sent over to Sage 50 if they're used in QuoteWerks. So if you plan on using discount items, charge items, and shipping items, and you need that information to flow over to Sage 50, you can select down here and you can see if a part number already exists for it, or you can create it in Peachtree now. For our example, I'm just going to go ahead and leave it blank because I'm not going to use those. But if you are using them, you'll want to make sure you map those. That way the items come over to Sage 50 correctly. Items without part number section. This is a very important section where I would recommend having this option selected, basically saying that part numbers are required for all items exported over to Sage 50. You don't have to do this. If you're not going to do that, just make sure you set the account numbers properly for those items. This will allow for the item to still be created in Sage 50 for you. And then grouped items, if you are using bundles in QuoteWerks and you want to sell the items as a single item rather than the individual items into Sage 50, you'll want to check this checkbox for converting those grouped items into a single rolled up item. Again, for most of you, you'll leave this unchecked, but the option is there if you do need to handle your bundles or your groups in that specific manner. Okay, so let's move on to the Customers tab. The Customers tab will allow you to look up the customer name based on the sold to information in QuoteWerks. You'll see you have the option also on the ship to or bill to. Some of you may want to adjust this, but the sold to is kind of like the default contact field in QuoteWerks, so that's typically the one that you're going to use. But if you're very diligent about making sure you're filling out the ship to or the bill to for that instead, that's fine. You'll have the option to adjust that here. If you want to use a different field like a customer ID from field, you can select one of the custom fields in QuoteWerks to use instead. Our recommendation is to use the sold to field if possible, if not using the ship to or the bill to instead. You also have the option to use the company name instead of the contact name for the ship to name. If you are sending those items out from Sage 50, it'll use that company name instead of the contact name. So you have that option as well. On the Vendors tab, you have the option of selecting the vendor from Sage 50, using the vendor full name in Sage 50, or looking it up in QuoteWerks. So whichever your preference is there. Most likely you'll use the option in Sage 50 because that's the one that is going to be actively used. And then sales reps, how you would like to map the sales rep from QuoteWerks to Sage 50. You don't have to map it, but if you want to, these are the options for you. You can leave it blank. You can map the QuoteWerks login name to the Peachtree sales rep ID. You can map the QuoteWerks login to the Peachtree sales rep full name. You can map the QuoteWerks full name to the sales rep full name, or you can manually map it, and then you can go through and actually set this up and choose how you want to set that up here. For our example, we're just going to go ahead and leave it empty. Okay, the next tab is the Defaults tab. When you click on the Defaults tab, this is where you can set your default fields and the default accounts for new items that are created in Sage 50. So as you're quoting out items from QuoteWerks that have never been sold before and they are being created in Sage 50 for you, you can use these default settings. So you can set a default stock item, sales account, inventory account, sales account, wages account, cost of sales account. These are all optional. You don't have to set these, and these are all default. So even if you set these and you create a new item and you want to adjust the account, you'll be able to do that when that item window appears. We're going to leave these blank for now, just so we can walk through in the integration video what that screen is going to look like. The Sales Tax tab is where you can choose how the taxable and non-taxable items are set up. You'll be able to select if it's taxable or exempt. And the last tab is going to be the Items tab. The The Items tab will allow you to display the Sage 50 item list in your QuoteWerks product lookup window. You need to have that selected in order for that to work. Once you've made those adjustments, just do a quick search, go back through the tabs, make sure you've set everything that you want, and simply need to click OK to save your settings. Once here, simply click OK again. And when you do that, you should see the Sage 50 icon in your QuoteWerks toolbar now. You can also get to that window by clicking on Tools, Export to Peachtree, and that will bring you up to the Select Documents to Export to Peachtree window, so you can start exporting over to Sage 50. For more information on setting up the Sage 50 accounting integration with QuoteWerks, please visit the QuoteWerks help file, or feel free to give us a call or send us an email. Thanks for watching.